More than ever, it is so important for people to have a good understanding of health and how it relates to longevity, maintaining wellness, and the recognition that industry very often is not on your side. So you have to get wise. And the COVID pandemic, I think, really demonstrated that many of the decisions that were being done were not really focused on the health and well being of all of society as much as it was the political and financial implications around the pandemic. So, with that in mind, you have to remember a few simple things. One is that there is no shortcut to health. And I'm making specific reference to what is happening with GLP-1 agonists like Wegovy or Ozempic, as people are using them for weight loss. These are very important drugs. So it's not that I'm at all against them. It's the fact that I recognize it is very important for people to understand timelines in order to make background so that you understand what is happening and what these are about. So these drugs are mimicking something that already happens in the body, which is that when you eat, they produce certain peptides that do a signal to the brain to indicate that you have eaten and therefore you should be satisfied. And this is how it works. This is why you don't overeat. And in some cultures, you'll remember many years ago, the Romans used to eat, and because food left, they would then vomit the food and eat some more. That's not good. And in the same way, there has to be an acknowledgement as to what is going on. My analogy to what is happening with GLP-1 agonists is very similar to if people were using injectable insulin as some kind of health adjunct. Insulin is extremely important, but for diabetics. Now, it has a lot of benefits outside of diabetes, but you wouldn't expect to see people suddenly randomly taking insulin. And this is because there are balances in terms of breaking through normal physiology. So, a little bit more with regards to these medications. There are lots of them, and it's important to understand the timeline. Up here is the original or the GLP-1. Then you have exenatide, you have liraglutide, you have semaglutide, albiglutide, and so all of these are variations of this GLP-1, the primary one, and they're using them to mimic what is happening in the body. And as I said, this has a lot of impacts. It's a good drug in terms of what it can do. Organ effects of GLP-1 agonists, it can have an impact on the kidney, fat, weight loss, the pancreas, gastrointestinal tract, muscle, heart, in terms of blood pressure and cardioprotection, and the brain. You would think if this is so good, why wouldn't everybody be on them? And this is again the same principle as insulin. Insulin is really good for diabetics. GLP-1 agonists are really good for people who have significant weight problems that should not or cannot be overcome by simple strategies around discipline, restricting the food that you eat, and exercise. This is what I mean. You cannot ever beat physiology. When we look at the timeline for these drugs, they were discovered in the 80s. They identify the principle of the incretins. These are the hormones that trigger that. By the 1990s, they found that you could use GLP-1 to enhance glucose secretion. And by 2005, the first one was approved. That's exenatide for type 2 diabetes. And by 2010 to 2024, you have liraglutide, which was rebranded as Saxenda. And so this is what they were doing in terms of it was officially approved for obesity. So one of the things you have to take into consideration is that these drugs are not new. So why is it that you're hearing so much about them? Well, because some of the drugs that were previously being used for a long time are coming off patent. So industry has to find other ways for people to pay for it. And so, therefore, if it's already being used in diabetes, the problem they've got is that they can't create a new drug to use for diabetes because it's off patent. And so, therefore, generic drugs are cheaper. You can't win with that. However, if you can find a new use for a drug and you can then patent that use, for example, with obesity, suddenly you have a winner. This is what you have to understand. So it's not that these drugs didn't work or hadn't worked before. It's just that this is just largely about industry. And you have to realize that. If you don't realize that, this is where you get into trouble. So at the moment, there's a lot of appeal for them in the sense that they're a quick fix, meaning that if you are not really obese, but you're trying to see if you can get down, this can help. You can lose 5 to 10% of your weight short term. There's a lot of pressure on the systems to get people on this because of the health impact of obesity. As I said, they reduce the health risk of obesity, and it is easier than the discipline of weight control. And as I said, the problem in medicine is that there are no shortcuts. Physiology is designed in such a way that it is optimal. And this is certainly my view. Some people think you can beat physiology and you can make a better version. I think that the minute you're going down that road, you start to run into extremely important problems. The reason why it had caught my attention was because of this paper looking at the glucagon peptide 1 receptors, GLP-1 agonists, and asthma in adolescents with obesity. That's what struck me. Because what I realized is that this is now being pushed as a benefit. By helping obesity, you will improve the asthma in these children. And I say that's pretty obvious. If you reduce their weight, it is no surprise that you will find that children's breathing problem will improve. Not necessarily that this is a wondrous treatment that will help everybody suddenly to get better. And it's interesting in the paper itself, when they looked at the analysis of it, they didn't say, and you can see it here, in their discussion is an important question is whether the observed association reflects weight loss or weight independent anti-inflammatory effects of the GLP-1s. And so they recognize, thus, we cannot determine the underlying mechanism, and prospective studies are needed to clarify whether these respiratory benefits are independent of weight loss. As I said, this is about finding another use where you can then shoehorn a drug into being used broadly. And here is the important piece of information that a lot of people don't quite understand. I have a suspicion, and this is just my thought, that there is recognized in industry that once people get on it and they see the benefits of weight loss, and when they get off it and they see the weight coming back, as has been showed in studies, they will never stop taking it. And so you've got a customer for life. That, in my mind, is where there is a big problem. And this is especially important with adolescents and children, because if you have them on this, that's 50, 60 years of therapy. That's a lot of money. In the same way, it wouldn't work the same for type 2 diabetes. And critically, we don't know the long term impact in people who don't already have a clear comorbidity. And this is some of the questions, the physiological risks in healthy individuals. It can impact on muscle mass, micronutrient deficiencies, neurohormonal disruption, and potentially even impacting on the fertility cycle. These are big issues. And the question, as I said, if you want to understand the context, just imagine that suddenly it was being promoted to use insulin in a similar way for building muscle or for some of the anabolic effects. Insulin is a very good drug, but we know that when you use it, you should use it in the most appropriate circumstances. One of the biggest challenges that I have seen, and this is from objective observation, is that principle of the rebound. Once you understand that using them desensitizes receptors with long-term use, so meaning if you had 100 receptors, if you're using it for a while, the body will down regulate these receptors. But when you discontinue, what may happen is you have rebound weight gain, intense hunger, binge eating, and you lose your natural satiety cues, therefore becoming dependent. As I said, I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes, some people think that this is an absolutely wonderful business model for repeat customers. And if that's what they're thinking, you need to understand that risk. You need to understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. If you have that understanding and you choose to do it, that's fine. But what I'm worried about is that a lot of people have not taken all of this into consideration. We are at a very strange time in medicine and science. And the reality is that more than ever, you need to think very carefully about your health, what you use, what you don't use, and remember that at the end of the day, for the vast majority of companies, you represent a customer, and a customer represents financial benefit. And once you know that and understand that, it should hopefully help you to do better decisions for your health. Remember the principle: you can never beat physiology. You can never beat simple discipline. Anything that is a shortcut is likely to have risks. Never forget that. Have a great evening.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.